Hello.
Hi.
Do you want me to mute or?
No, you don't need to mute at all. Welcome,
Okay.
welcome. I'm going to share my screen and just get to my PowerPoint. Ooh, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. I'm just, I am going to turn my audio and video off for a second because I need to go run, but I'll be right back.
Okay.
Hi, there we go. Perfect. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Phew.
Yeah, Becca just stepped away for for a second.
Oh, good. Okay, I thought I was having technical difficulties for a second. So I'm glad that... Well, it's so nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's really nice to meet you as well. Yeah, I was. Go ahead.
Do you know May Cobb?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, she's a good friend of mine, and I just saw that you guys were connected on Instagram. So.
Oh yeah. I went to her book launch after I'd moved here from Germany, and Nina has decided she wants to talk. So Nina, come here. You're gonna have to go away. This is my cat, Nina. All right, go, Nina. Come on now. Yeah, so I went to her book launch of Big Wood, and yeah, it was so great, and I've just kind of kept in touch just a little bit with her.
Yeah, she's kind of my writing wife. I talk to her all the time about different,
Oh, that's awesome.
writing issues.
Do you also do like trades of things?
Mostly we read each other's stuff so we can weigh in. So, last summer gave her a revision. I was like, my editor is saying this, should I do it this way or that way? And she'll weigh in. And so I kind of do that for her too. And like last minute we'll send each other sentences. Like we kind of like help each other through revisions, especially. So yeah, thank God.
Which is so helpful.
It's so helpful just when you need, an outside opinion really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Hello.
Hi.
I want to say Marit, but I think I'm saying it wrong.
It's Marit. Yeah.
Marit. I knew I was saying it incorrectly, but I thought, let me just jump in and say it incorrectly so that she will kindly tell me how to say it correctly. Marit. What a beautiful name. Norwegian, is that right?
Norwegian, yep.
Very cool. Have you read, I'm going to sound like a one-note person, but have you read The Mercies by Karen Millwood Hargrave?
No.
Ooh, it's historical
Okay,
fiction, and it's set on a little island north of, at the very tip of Norway in the 1600s.
Okay, I'm writing it
It's
down.
wonderful.
I need like all the recommendations I can get for this.
Take
long
it, sister.
summer, right?
Yeah, right. The slog that we're in. So just let me say up front before I officially welcome our wonderful authors. Hello, everyone. So nice that you're here. We are we're going to ask that you actually at this time not turn on your video. That actually the only folks who are going to be on video are myself and our two lovely guest authors. And then once we go into breakout rooms, you're going to be welcome to turn on your videos, turn on your mics if you're able to, and have a nice little mix it up and chat with some other writers. So welcome to our 3:30 genre meeting, young adult. No pressure, but you guys are you're gonna reveal all in this fascinating genre for us. But let me tell you really quickly for those of you who have not been to a genre meetup yet. So we'll have a conversation to start between myself and our guest authors. And then after the conversation, I'm going to send anybody who would like to stick around into breakout rooms, smaller breakout rooms. And that's when you're gonna turn on your video. I would ask that if you do not want to join a breakout room, please leave the meeting pretty quickly, because that way we don't throw you into a room that you're not going to attend and someone's sitting there by themselves. So if you could drop out, that way our magic of splitting people up works well. And then our wonderful writers are going to bop around a little bit and talk to you in your breakouts, which is going to be an opportunity to catch, any lingering questions you might have, or just have a chance to spend some time with these really terrific people. And then we're going to end those breakout rooms pretty promptly, 5 minutes before the hour. You are benefiting from being the last breakout sessions of the afternoon. So, if I'm feeling particularly, I don't know, generous is the wrong word because that sounds like I'm being too powerful. It might go a little longer. So I just want to remind you, when we go into those breakout rooms, that one good idea is to ask your fellow writers some questions, or maybe pick up on a thread that we talked about during this conversation that will spark some conversation in your breakout room. Be aware of how long you're speaking. This is something I always have to remember, that everybody deserves an opportunity, and sometimes folks don't feel as comfortable interrupting. So just make sure everyone in the breakout room is having a chance to share if they'd like to. And choose your words wisely. It's been an amazing weekend, and everyone's been so respectful and lovely to each other. So let's keep that going for our last session. So I'm going to stop sharing because the rest of it, who cares? I will mention that if you have a question specifically about young adult and you want to throw it into the chat box, I will be watching those while we're talking, and I'll ask as many of them as I can. But if they're really specific especially to one of the individual authors, then I might let them answer that question for you if they hop into your breakout room. But here we go. Without further ado, I'm gonna read our bios, and then we're going to jump in. Britta Jensen's debut novel, Eloia Born, was longlisted for the 2016 Exeter Novel Prize, and reviewers have called the book both a dystopian narrative and a quest story. Consider it a spiritual successor to Lois Lowry's The Giver and M. Night Shyamalan's The Village. Pretty nice. The sequel, Hirana's War, releases in October of this year. Her stories have been shortlisted for the 2017 Henshaw Press and Fiction Factory Prizes, and she was published in several anthologies. Her plays have been performed in New York City, Japan, and South Korea. Thank you, Britta, for joining us today. She's a longtime also member of the Writers League of Texas, and we love seeing her face whenever we can. And then our second distinguished guest is Maret Weisenberg, has a master's degree from UCLA in cinema and media studies and worked as a film and television executive for a number of years. She currently lives here in Austin with her husband and 2 daughters, and her more recent titles, her previous titles include Select and Select Few. And then you have a new book coming out very soon, right?
I do, September 1st, yeah, the Insomniacs.
The Insomniacs, okay. So I want to start there because you both, when we put out the call for this event, we asked our attendees to tell us what genres they would be showing up for so that we'd have an idea. And we did what often happens. We mixed middle grade and YA together. So we said, oh yeah, we'll just do one session, middle grade, YA, we'll cover it all. And then rightfully people reached out and said, well, actually, could you split them? Because there's so much to talk about within them. And then even further, we had folks who said, well, could you talk about YA fantasy? Because that in itself feels like a huge, big category. So you two are writing different types of YA, and I'm so glad to have you here to kind of share your own perspective as writers. So I'm going to start, Marit, with you, because I didn't read out the title of your most recent book, and I want you to mention it, but I'd love for you to just describe your work as a writer in the YA space. What are you writing?
Well, it always has a strong romance and coming of age. Those are kind of my two, and family. So romance, I would say, is number 1, coming of age, number 2. And then my first 2 books, they were a series. They had just a brush of sci-fi. It was a little bit of speculative fiction. So I kind of mixed that in there. But now the new book is straight ahead contemporary YA. But of course, I can't do anything, I can't just write a book about a romance on a beach over the summer. So there's some it's a big, there are multiple mysteries that are interconnected in the Insomniacs. It's a bit of a Rear Window meets coming of age romance, right? So, but you know, I love families and dynamics in families, and just, yeah, I just have a soft spot for romance always.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for giving us that glimpse, and I'm excited for the Insomniacs. Are you doing an event when that comes out? Do you know yet what you're doing?
I was booked at Book People for September, you know, the second week of September. So now I assume that's going to be virtual. And
All right.
Lila Sales, who is, you know, a young adult and middle grade author. Is
We know Lila Sales.
Yeah, she's going to moderate. So I assume it's going to move to Zoom, but it's sad. It's all a different landscape now, but hopefully it'll still
Yeah, and both of you, I know, have books coming out, and it's sort of hard to even know right at this moment what the fall is going to look like, but I think we all kind of know what the fall is going to look like.
We kind of
Britta, what about you? Tell us if you were to just explain to us who you are as a writer in the YA space, what would you say?
I would say I love having kick-ass female heroines. That's definitely something that has emerged more subconsciously than like a conscious effort to write kick-ass female heroines, but there's always a character that has some sort of either psychological or physical disability. And I grew up surrounded by individuals that were visually impaired or deaf. Like my mom was an interpreter for the deaf. And also as a teacher, I had a lot of students who just either had learning difficulties or other, like were trying to navigate that space, but there weren't a ton of stories when I first started teaching that addressed some of their concerns as young adults. And so I had just started writing stories for them as just as like a way to bribe them. And I didn't really think it was going to work. And so I think what emerged from that was trying to have a background similar to mine, where there's a lot of different cultures. And I think the fact that most of my stories take place on planets and universes I've invented, where there are songs, there are languages I've made up, and fun creatures as well as, of course, there being romance. But I think it's definitely, I try to keep a blend of action and romance. For a long time, I didn't want there to be as much of a love story element, but it just kept sucking me in.
Right. And I imagine it's an expectation of the genre, right? I mean, not for all YA, but there is sort of an expectation that there's going to be some kind of romantic something. And I guess that brings me then to my really first question when it comes to the genre of YA. And I guess that is, what does that mean to each of you? What does that mean to be in the YA category? What does it mean in terms of the ages that you're expecting your readers are going to be? And of course, we hope that a lot of YA ends up being read by adult audiences. But in terms of, who's the reader in your mind's eye when you're writing YA? And Britta, I'm looking at you, so I'm going to start.
I thought it was ages 13 upwards, like 13 to 18 mostly, but I'd say once you turn 17 and 18, you often start drifting away from YA, and then people start to come back to it in their like mid-20s. But I've actually recently discovered that even 5th graders are starting to read YA. And I was very surprised by that. And so it's made me kind of think about some of the things in my book, even though I'm writing really for that we're either in the middle of puberty or on our way to having gone through it. And so that's kind of the sweet spot age-wise is definitely 14 to 17, I think.
So Marit, what do you think of? What is the sort of reader in your mind's eye, age-wise, when you're writing?
I always like to, I think that I'm writing for the older teens, and I agree. I've been surprised by how young they are when they want to be reading YA. And I have a 11-year-old who all of a sudden is reading the Selection series and the Hunger Games. And, all of a sudden she's kind of leaving middle grade in the dust. And, so that, I think I write darker. And so I've always thought about that I'm aiming for older readers. But I would say there's really, I recently was talking to book people about what recommendations do you have for the younger YA, kind of age appropriate for that younger set? Because I mean, it can be very dark. So.
Yeah, and we actually learned at the middle grade genre session yesterday that there's something now called upper middle grade that is meant to be, I know, right? That is really, I guess, becoming a place where it's not still firmly in the sort of space of middle grade, but it's meant to reach probably those 13 to 14, maybe 13, 14, even 15-year-olds who aren't quite, you're not taking them all the way up to YA. What sort of, when you came to this genre, what were the expectations that you learned, or that you probably learned either from an agent or an editor, I would assume, or maybe just from reading in the market and reading other books that really define what the content, what the situation is often in a YA versus probably not so much middle grade as thinking even adult, right? Because there are plenty of novels for the adult market that include protagonists who are younger. But what is it that makes a book besides age? Let's not talk about age anymore, situationally YA. And Marit, now I'm looking at your face, so I'm gonna let you go.
I think the way it's been described to me is that it primarily is broad, but it has to deal with a person in that, 14 to 18, their life and their problems. So you need to stay away from having adults be really large characters. I mean, that's very, strict. But so it needs to focus on that experience and not have be taken over by children or adults, basically.
Gotcha. And then in terms, just sticking with you, because I know we're talking about romance and mystery in your upcoming book too. What are there rules or expectations there in terms of how far does, romance go in YA, and what have you learned about writing those sorts of romantic situations?
I mean, I would say my big surprise is that pretty much anything can go. Where I've had to be careful is language. Like, oddly, more than sexual content. And there's some really, I love them. They're very racy, like Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, which is one of my favorites. But like, these very sexy scenes. But I've really had to stay away from the F word, or at least like know how much I'm putting it in there, because librarians are, it's a thing. They really need to look out for that, which surprises me, because I wouldn't have thought that swearing of all things was, at least could prevent your book from getting, being in a library.
Right.
A school library.
Yeah,
so,
I'm
we're going to come back
too.
I want to come back to the libraries in a second, but Britta, what about you? What do you think about situationally? What were sort of the discoveries you made in terms of the types of narrative or story you would be telling in YA?
I think one thing that's important that was pointed out to me was if I'm going to try an unusual structure, that it needs to be something that a broad range of readership can actually digest. Because if, I've taught a lot of struggling readers, and if the structure of the narrative is too difficult for them to follow, particularly because I have two different point of view characters, and in Hirana's where I have three, I have to be careful how I use a non-chronological structure. And my editor and I kind of went back and forth about that in a good way, like having that deep conversation about, okay, will someone who maybe isn't the most proficient reader still be able to follow this narrative structure? And I think there's a lot of pressure on YA authors to kind of front load exposition so that struggling readers right away are like, okay, I'm in this place, this is how old the characters are, da 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 da. And to some point, you do have to have a little bit of that, I think, but I think there's also ways to kind of nuance that, and that's where I'm really thankful to have great editors who can help me kind of navigate that territory, so I'm not doing it alone.
I love that you said that, because I hadn't really thought of that before, that sometimes we think of it as, you know, the sophistication of the reader in terms of their life experience and what they can read about, but also it's about their sophistication in terms of the way they digest stories and whether the story itself will be accessible to them because they haven't necessarily read a lot of experimental fiction or, you know, other ways of telling stories that are a little more complex. So I would love to stick with what you said about front loading the exposition a little bit, because can you explain what you meant by that to the folks who are listening?
Yeah, that's where, like, I think in modern, probably the last maybe 50 years, we've had this kind of change from a lot of like classic literature. You have the exposition is kind of, it's harder to get into the novel because that first maybe 20 pages, you're getting to know all the different characters in a more kind of static way. Whereas if you start in media res, we're going to have the exposition or the background story is going to be kind of trickled through the narrative. And with a lot of YA readers, sometimes having that trickled, like an adult reader, that's easy for them to pick up because they're like, oh, I've read, you know, over 50 books, so I know it's this type of novel. Whereas some YA novels, they'll be like, my name is da 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 da. And I can't think of an example off the top of my head. John Green's coming to mind, but I could be totally like wrong about that. And I love reading books that kind of right away have that snappy, like, here we go.
Right.
But I knew that that wasn't how I was trying to write, but I also wanted there to be a sense of like, here's like in the first 10 chapters, what are the main things, or excuse me, the first 5 chapters, what are the main things I want my readers to know so that they're not lost? Like they need to know it's on another planet and that the people look like us somewhat, but that they have some differentiation. And how do I do that in a way that's lyrical and not like, bloop, bloop, bloop. Here's some exposition blobs.
Right. And an editor is going to be really helpful with that too, I imagine, for that part of it. There's a question that I think is an interesting one, and I'm not sure how easy it'll be to answer, but Judith says, situationally, I was unhappy with a YA that had a 15-year-old protagonist with a boyfriend who went to college. And that sort of opens all sorts of questions up about, you know, for her, why would this college student be dating a 15-year-old? Was that appropriate for the 15-year-old? So I guess I would ask you both, and Marit, I'll start with you. Are there certain taboos in this genre? Are there certain things that you really that YA shouldn't? Or I mean, I don't want you to become the moral, like, you know, girl of YA.
Oh, that's
but I guess, like,
question.
what are those questions that people wrestle with, and do you have any just sort of general thoughts about that as a writer, how you approach that sort of thought?
What comes to mind is I'm very scared about writing anything that I don't have, that's not my own experience. I would say, if YA is just so, you know, I think if you back it up with research and like I know my friend wrote about autism, but she doesn't have anyone in her family who is autistic, and she, you know, got some flack for that, and she said, like, I did my research, I was very careful. So I would say that is something like I could probably be a bit braver and then have my editor tell me to go back. But I would say I'm cautious about, you know, keeping it in the realm of something that at least I can relate to. So.
Right. So whether it's relating to it because of a certain kind of relationship dynamic, or relating to it regarding, you know, actual, I don't know, a situation in your own life that you wouldn't feel comfortable necessarily writing about something that you're not quite as connected to, right?
Yeah, I think it's authenticity. I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say too, and I think this is interesting, how much does contemporary technology feature into your plot and character interactions? And I think that's another thing that is, I'm sticking with you, Mara, because I think that's probably also for contemporary YA, a place where, you know, you can get outside of your own comfort zone if it gets too technical, but also it throws a real wrench into stories sometimes when you have to worry about whether they could just pick up their cell phones and talk to each other. So can you speak to that what you think about with technology?
Oh, it's so, you know, so in my past books, I've just simply used, you know, texting and cell phones, and I haven't really worried about it too much, and I haven't gone down too much of the social media. You know, sometimes they'll say I checked out the person's social media, but this last book I just finished, I decided to kind of glance on privacy, and I have a main character who takes a DNA test, and then I have to have her search out, like, through finding a relative, the right name of a relative, through all of these different channels like Craigslist, and it was such a nightmare to do. And I'm like, why did I ever decide to touch this? But I got through it, and I think the pieces stand. But yeah, and how much I don't know about the nitty gritty. And I had to realize that if I have at least, don't worry about going down a rabbit hole, just get what you can right. You know, what you're putting on there, that has to be right.
Well, and I bet that's a part of why too, that we were having a conversation in our historical fiction session earlier about, you know, the letters you get from readers, because whiteout, you know, wasn't invented at the moment that you have these characters using whiteout. And I would think especially in this genre, that you have readers who might be more sophisticated even than the writer in terms of technology and what you could do, and, you know, making sure that you're making it believable to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, TikTok is missing from everything that I write, you know.
What is TikTok? And then jumping back to or on that idea of what we write about and what is allowed and what is not allowed in YA, there's a follow-up question that Haley had, and Britta, I'm going to throw this to you. Mm-hmm. Are there stricter responsibilities put on YA authors because the readers are perceivably more impressionable? What do you think of that?
I think it depends on the context. It depends on a couple of things. I think it depends on, like, how, for example, in the UK, YA authors aren't under as much pressure to not have racy scenes, whereas I feel in the US, there's still a need to not show as much flesh and not get into details that could be more erotic. And also the issue of librarians saying, we won't carry your book. And I think because I taught middle school and high school for such a long time, that in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, what librarian is not gonna let this pass muster? And at some point, like, I talked to my editor, because I have a scene where a younger man who would be considered of age on his planet has an affair with his teacher's wife, which I had just written it just because that's where that character took me, but I felt uncomfortable about it and I wanted to change it. And my editor, multiple times, he's like, no, actually it really fits the arc and it makes sense later on in the book. And I won't reveal too much because it's in Hirana's War, but I think for me, I want there to be subtlety because it allows the reader to use their imagination to decide what comes next. And I like that when I worked in theater, I remember this scene where this woman is reaching for a man and she's having an affair. And just the angle of her body as she reaches for him and the way the light was on her was so much more powerful than seeing and even reading something that would give me more details about what happened next.
Mm-hmm. I like it. So you both have mentioned librarians, and, you know, I think we don't always talk about the huge influence they wield in the children's market, across the board in the children's market. But Marit, I'm going to throw it back to you. Someone alluded to your question about this sort of, or your comment about the F word, about language, and said, is that, you know, you can't have one F word in there? What's the rule? What are the rules? And I guess in a bigger way, since you can't answer that, I think it is in some ways subjective too, to particular, you know, librarians who might be more vocal, or whoever is, who's reading the book and giving feedback. But what does that look like? What is the importance of librarians in this market?
Oh, well, my experience is, you know, going to Texas Librarians Association, a massive conference every year, except for this year. But that's when I kind of understood the power, and also the awards that they give out, and the lists and the vote. And once, you know, you are voted onto a list, I mean, that means something totally different for your book, the success of your book. And so besides just word of mouth, it's pretty amazing. But yeah, it was funny with the swearing. I was at TLA, and and it was great meeting librarians from all over Texas. And this woman came up to me, a librarian, and said, "I'm from a very small town. Is there swearing in your book?" And I was like, yes. And she was like, "I just can't have it." You know, so I think you know, Texas is a huge state, and then you do have some small towns, very different places. So that was surprising to me. And then, you know, you know, in Austin, our 6th grade elementary teacher has YA on her shelf. So I think it runs the gamut.
Yeah. Well, and just that there are, when you think about it, there are so many libraries, you know, across the country, and they're not only the ones that are in public places, but also in schools. Mm-hmm. And those are real book sales for publishers. Those are really important sales. So librarians are, you know, there's a reason why if librarians or a certain group of librarians like the TLA give the thumbs up to a book, it can be really impactful. And especially in the younger, I think the younger space too, middle grade and picture books, for sure. Could you guys just name, and then I really do want to send everyone into breakout rooms to talk, but could you give us a couple of your favorites? I always assume that anybody, and maybe this is an assumption that's incorrect, but I assume that someone who's writing in any genre, but someone who's writing in YA, that maybe there have been authors, maybe they're today, or maybe they were a few years ago, that were really important to you as, you know, as young readers, or as just readers anywhere between 18 and, you know, your age today, in the YA space. Could you name maybe some folks that we would be happy to be introduced to? Marit, I'm looking at you again, so I'm letting you start.
I mean, the one that you know, the book that made me decide I wanted to write YA was Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell, which, you know, is super duper popular, but if you haven't read it, it's just such a beautiful book. So that's my, you know, all-time favorite. And yeah, and then it's not romance, but one of my Tell the Wolves I'm Home by Carol Rivka Brunt is just the most beautiful book. And I think it got sort of co-opted by YA, but it is just the most beautiful literary novel, young adult novel, that I highly recommend.
Awesome. I don't know that one. I'll have to look it up. Eleanor and Park, I agree. I think I spelled Eleanor wrong in the chat, but what a cool book that is. And especially for contemporary YA, I think it's just such a great, like, just really fresh and exciting story. Britta, what about you?
I also I had Eleanor and Park on my list here, as well as I really love Maresi by Maria Torchaninoff. So Maresi is spelled M-A-R-E-S-I. I have the cover here. And so it's considered to be YA in the EU. In the US, it's promoted as a adult novel, but it really is YA. And I love it a lot, as well as The Memory of Water by Emi Itaranta. And The Memory of Water just has a fantastic futuristic structure. And I also love Kate Ling and she's a writer in the UK, and she writes about like a voyage to a new planet and then surviving on that new planet. And she's got this fantastic multicultural cast. And so I think, like, for me, I divide my time between YA and adult novels. Like, I'm hugely influenced by N.K. Jemisin. And she's definitely not YA, but a lot of young people read her because she's amazing. And then, yeah, Zadie Smith, Zora Neale Hurston are some non-YA favorites. So
let me ask you to just talk about YA fantasy for a moment before I send you guys off. Where would you say would be a great place for someone to start if they wanted to understand or get to know other writers in that space? Where are, you know, up and coming writers in YA fantasy hanging out? What are the tips you have for those folks?
Absolutely. I think SCBWI is huge, the Society of Children's Writers and Book Illustrators. Writers League also has a super robust community of speculative fiction writers. And I moved to Austin 2 years ago, so I found fantastic critique partners through the Writers League. And then SCBWI is fantastic. And also just getting a chance to do like a few meetup groups with people who enjoy speculative fiction, because what's interesting about YA speculative fiction is that all the speculative fiction people tend to kind of bind together, even people who aren't necessarily writing YA, because it is such an unusual genre that requires a lot of editing around just the actual world that you've built. And so we all need each other. And also Worldcon. So if you can go to like conventions like Armadillo Con, Worldcon, and there are other like fantasy cons around where you get a chance to go to actual, you know, talk to authors. Like I got to meet Martha Wells last year, and she like took one of my book postcards, and like I felt like my life had been, you know, changed from meeting Martha Wells. And so I think going to those cons gives you a great chance to just interact with people at different stages of either their career or being aspiring authors themselves.
Sure. Thank you. Marit, last question for you. You come from the film side of things, right? So I'm just wondering if you have thoughts or tips about storytelling, things that you learned from watching the way that filmmakers tell stories that has helped you or informed what you're doing now as a novelist in the YA space.
I think it's so similar, that 3-act structure. So anytime you look at a movie, you see the inciting incident, you see, you know, the climax. There are different points that, you know, for me, I was taught to write a novel in the 3-act structure. So it's so similar. So I kind of love watching films, and TV shows are trickier, but still you can take parts out, and it really helped me understand structure. And I think all the years of reading screenplays, I just started to kind of ingest, hopefully, that rhythm of how a story, like, okay, now we need to have that moment where, you know, everything looks pretty good, but it's all about to crash down. Like everyone's getting too complacent, or like, I just know those, I think I know those beats. And I think a lot of people do just from being TV watchers and film watchers and reading books. But, you know, film there's not as much time. And so you have to get to those points faster, where you can pad a book a little more, you know, just because you want to explore something. But to learn how to move ahead and to hit all of the you know, kind of 5 big things, 5 big points you need, it's great to study films.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, guys, we're going to drop into breakout rooms. You two are awesome, and I really appreciate you doing this. And I appreciate you being willing to stick around and drop into some rooms to talk to people. So if you're going to leave, go ahead and leave. Leave now or forever hold your peace. And Marit and Britta, what I'm going to do is give you a heads up when I'm about to move you into another room. so that you won't be so shocked to be yanked out. And it looks like we're gonna have about pretty good number of rooms, like in terms of your ability to visit 2 rooms each of you. So so just give me 1 second to kind of make to kind of play God here with my rooms. All right, I know what I'm doing. I'm opening all rooms. Go ahead, and if you everyone can turn the video on, you should be able to speak. I have given you permission to speak, and go have fun. Thanks, guys. Hi, Gina. You're welcome to go into a room if you want, or you're welcome to just, chill out. I'm just gonna monitor. I do not need help with the room. So if you wanna hop into your room or if you wanna sign off, it's up to you entirely. Hi, Kelly. Did you wanna go?
Would you mind allowing me to have video?
Sure. You should be allowed to have video. I'm gonna ask you to start your video.
Yeah, that's it. It wouldn't let me switch back on.
Okay.
Perfect. And then I was in 3.
Yeah, you should. I'm hoping that you're going to be able to send yourself back in there. Is there a pop-up with the breakout room?
Yeah, I see it. Okay.
Cool. Have fun. Lily, are you having trouble?
I am. I think I don't know, it was working earlier and now it's not.
Your video? Okay.
Yeah.
It's not even, I'm not even seeing that you have video. I normally, if their video isn't on, I can ask them to turn it on, but I actually don't even have the video option for you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's fine. Yeah, I was just wondering if there was anything I could do. But
Yeah, I think I don't know what's going on, but I think it might be it might not be on in terms of Zoom on Zoom's end. So or it might be something that got snaggled when you came into the room.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. That's okay. How do I go back to my room?
If you go to your breakout rooms little chat box, there's the breakout rooms in progress box. It should still be telling you to join.
Oh yeah, it works. All right, thanks.
Have fun. Hi, Barbara. Up there's Britta. Hold on. What?
I didn't figure out how to get back to the next break room.
Oh, you know what? I was going to send you there.
Oh, I'm
Yeah, I was
sorry.
going to leave you and then I would move you, but that's totally fine. Don't worry about it. You were, there you are. Okay, I'm going to send you into room 1 right now.
Awesome.
Have fun.
So can you hear me? No.
Yeah.
Oh, you can? I dialed in by mistake. So I'm going to say bye-bye for now.
Okay. Bye-bye. look at you all. Just yanked you right back. And I think when you came into the room, I made it, I don't know, we make it so you can't even talk. Sorry. Thanks so much, guys. I hope you had a chance to have a little bit of a conversation, both with our wonderful authors who stuck around, but also with each other. Thank you for the last genre session that I'm doing at this unconference and that you're all doing at this unconference. So we have one more session, 5 p.m., our closing session, and it's going to be so great. I'm excited. Kathy Valentine, Elizabeth McCracken, and Chen Chen, all just sharing their brilliance with us. So I hope you will come back for that. But mostly I want to say a big, big thank you to Britta and to Marit for being here and for just being such great authors to talk to for a little while today about young adult. So have a great rest of your next 30 minutes and I'll see you. I hope I see all of you or many of you at 5 o'clock. So thanks so much, authors, and thank you to everybody. Have a great rest of the weekend. Fond farewell to you all. Fond farewell to you all.